The harbor has gone quiet. 14 people walked up the gangway of the Ardennes Star and simply ceased to exist. No distress signals, no screams, only the silence. Now, the hatch is opening again. But be careful. On this ship, even the dust is alive. The harbor had gone quiet, in a way that no engine noise, no shouted orders, could seem to fix. Special Agent Marlowe had worked the docks before. Drunken brawls, smuggling operations, the occasional body pulled from the water at low tide. But standing at the edge of Pier 14, at 6 in the morning, staring at the Ardennes Star, wedged crooked against the concrete breakwater, he felt something settle deep in his chest. Something he hadn't felt since his very first year on the job. Something that lived beneath rational thought, below professional training. Something that his body recognized, before his mind had the language for it. The ship had arrived 3 days ago, without a single radio transmission, without a harbor guide, without so much as a light on the bow to announce itself. It had materialized out of the pre-dawn fog and drifted straight into the breakwater at just enough speed to lodge itself against the concrete. Not enough to sink, not enough to cause catastrophic damage. And the harbor master, who had first stepped aboard, had turned around, walked calmly back down the gangway, and refused to go near it again. 2 teams had gone inside since then, sent in at 12-hour intervals. 14 people total, 7 police officers, 4 forensic investigators, 2 hazmat technicians, and 1 retired detective who had apparently volunteered himself for reasons that no one had yet managed to satisfactorily explain, and who was now among the missing. No radio contact after the first 10 minutes. On either team, no distress signals, no sound of any kind, just 14 people who had walked up the gangway, passed through the main hatch, and continued into the interior of the vessel, and then quietly ceased to exist. Dr. Elliot Cass had not been anyone's first choice for this mission, a fact that had been communicated to him with the specific efficiency of an institution that had run out of better options. He was a research scientist, attached to the FBI's Materials Analysis Unit. Quiet man, a methodical man, who spent the majority of his working hours in a sub-basement laboratory 3 floors below street level. He cataloged chemical residues. He compared mineral compositions. He had never, in 13 years with the Bureau, ever been dispatched to an active investigation. When the call came at 5:30 in the morning, he sat on the edge of his bed for nearly a full minute, holding the phone against his ear, certain that whoever was on the other end had dialed incorrectly. The briefing was short, because the truth was that nobody had very much to brief him on. Nobody knew what was aboard the ship. Nobody knew what had become of the 48 crew members listed on the vessel's last known manifest, filed 9 days ago from a port in northern Greece. Nobody could explain why the ship had traveled all the way from the Aegean without a single logged communication. And nobody, and this was the part that Elliot kept returning to as he rode the elevator down to the equipment bay, nobody could explain what had happened to 14 trained professionals who had gone aboard with full gear and clear protocols and never come back out. "Your instructions are straightforward," said Deputy Director Chun, standing across the briefing table from him, with the particular exhausted precision of someone who had been awake for 30 consecutive hours. "You go in, you document everything you can reach safely, and the moment, the absolute moment, You believe you are in any kind of danger. You turn around and you leave. You don't investigate further. You don't attempt to locate the missing personnel. You leave immediately, and you don't stop until you're back on the pier. He had nodded. He had accepted the instructions, and the equipment, and the suit, and he had walked out into the cold morning air, with a camera strapped to his chest, and the slow, quiet understanding settling over him that this was what a one-way mission felt like. From the inside, not dramatic, not charged with energy, just a steady walk toward a door that many better prepared people had already walked through. His file was already closed. His next of kin notifications already drafted somewhere in a folder on someone's desktop. He had no next of kin, which was perhaps the most honest explanation for why his name had risen to the top of the list. They fitted him with a positive pressure protective suit, full level, a biohazard configuration, sealed at every seam, its own air supply running off tanks clipped to his back. They handed him a digital camera, a flashlight, and a radio that he privately suspected would lose signal the moment the ship's steel hull surrounded him. He checked the suit seals twice, then a third time, because the third time was a habit he couldn't seem to break. And then he walked down to the water's edge and looked up at the ship. The Ardennes Star sat against the breakwater with the stillness of something that had been there for years, rather than days. Its hull was streaked with rust, running down from the rail like old wounds. Its windows dark, reflecting nothing. Not a single seagull had landed on it since it arrived. He had noticed that from the pier. He had not yet been able to stop noticing it. He started up the gangway. The gangway flexed under his feet in a way that suggested its moorings weren't fully secure. Elliot moved slowly, one gloved hand on the railing, testing each step before committing his weight to it. Below him, the harbor water was black and perfectly flat, undisturbed. When he reached the deck and stepped through the hatch into the corridor beyond, the sound of the harbor cut off. The distant engines, the voices of the response team, the low hum of the city behind the waterfront, all of it cut off so completely and so suddenly that he stopped moving for a moment and simply stood inside the silence, letting his body adjust to the quality of it. The first thing his flashlight found was a set of equipment cases, open, ransacked, their contents spread across the corridor floor in a loose constellation. Flashlights, evidence markers, camera equipment, not violently scattered, not flung, just distributed in the specific casual way that suggested someone had set them down, meaning to come back, and had simply never done so. Several of the flashlights were still on, their beams painting pale lines across the deck plating. Exhausted, but persistent, he photographed everything before stepping over any of it, treating the floor as a document. Further down the corridor, someone had written on the wall 3 letters, large enough to read from a distance, traced in something dark and rust-colored, dried, cracked at the edges, now lifting away from the paint in fine flakes. As he stood in front of it with his flashlight held level, studying the pressure of the marks. The way the letters grew slightly smaller and more compressed toward the end, as if the writer had been running out of something, energy, time, the certainty that the message would be found by anyone capable of acting on it. He photographed it and kept moving. What he found as he worked his way deeper into the vessel was a story told in absences, a coffee mug on a navigation console, with a film of pale mold growing across the surface. A logbook left open to an entry that ended mid-sentence, in the middle of a routine cargo notation. The pen, still clipped to the page. A cabin where someone had pushed every piece of furniture against the door from the inside. A desk, 2 chairs, a storage locker dragged sideways across the threshold, and then apparently departed through some other means, because the furniture was still perfectly in place. The door was intact, and there was no way to explain the gap between those 2 facts in any way that felt comfortable. A corridor where every single overhead light had been deliberately broken, the glass crushed under feet and kicked against the baseboards, as though at some point the darkness had seemed like the better option. The ship itself was not a civilian vessel. He recognized the signs, the same way he recognized the signs of tampering in a sample. Reinforced compartments behind the passenger quarters. Encrypted communications terminals with government specification casings. Manifest paperwork filed in triplicate under a company name that didn't appear in any commercial registry. Whatever the Ardennes Star was, it had been moving through the world, wearing a costume, operating under one identity, while being something else entirely, and the people who had crewed it had not been ordinary sailors. He followed the gradient of wrongness downward, through 2 more corridors, and a stairwell that groaned melodramatically under his weight, until he reached the cargo hold. The door was heavy steel, manually latched, the kind of door designed to stay closed under pressure. He noted, with the part of his mind still cataloging rather than anticipating, that the latch was in the open position. He pulled the door wide and stepped through. The smell reached him first, or rather, the absence of it. There was no decay, no biological corruption, none of the heavy sweetness he would have expected from a sealed space, sitting in a harbor for 3 days. The air that rolled out of the cargo hold was dry, neutral, papery, like the air inside an archive room that hadn't been opened in a generation. Then he swept his flashlight across the floor, and he saw the dust. It was thick, genuinely thick. Not the thin film of neglect he'd seen elsewhere on the ship, but a settled, dense layer that lay undisturbed across every horizontal surface. Gray-white and fine, the kind of depth that accumulates, not over days or months, but over what would have to be decades. It covered the floor in an unbroken blanket. It covered the equipment crates stacked along the walls, covered the bodies. He counted 11 before he made himself stop counting. Because counting implied a finality he wasn't ready to commit to. The bodies were simply bodies. Men, all of them, lying in the positions they had fallen. Some face down, arms stretched forward, as though they had been trying to crawl somewhere and simply run out of the ability to keep going. Some curled on their sides, one propped against a support column in a posture that might have looked peaceful from the doorway if you managed to keep your eyes above the waist. But their distorted shapes told a different story. Every single one of them, every man, each body, without exception, had a stomach swollen to a grotesque and impossible fullness. The skin stretched so tightly across the rounded mass beneath that it had taken on the pale translucency of something pushed well past its structural limits. The navel flattened and distorted, the flesh so taut, it looked as though the slightest additional pressure would split it cleanly along the midline. The swelling had the particular hard roundness of something interior and intentional, not the gas bloat of decomposition, but the deliberate, geometric fullness of something that had been growing inside each man, according to its own schedule, feeding on what the body offered, until it had taken everything it needed, and the bodies themselves showed exactly that cost. Limbs dried and thin as driftwood, muscles wasted down to nothing, faces collapsed inward at the cheeks and temples, as though the skull were pressing outward through the skin, because the tissue between them had been consumed from within. The hands, crabbed and skeletal, against the dusty floor, fingers curled on nothing. Whatever had grown inside each of these men had used them up as thoroughly and as completely as a fire uses wood, leaving the same remnant, the shape of the thing, hollowed, still roughly holding the outline of what it had been. Elliot stood very still in the center of the hold. He breathed slowly. He let himself look at every part of it, because he was a scientist, and because looking at things was what he was here to do, and because the alternative to looking was something he didn't want to name. He was in the process of raising his camera when he heard the sound came from behind him and to the left, soft, deliberate, the specific wet shifting sound of something large readjusting its weight against a surface. Even before he turned, he knew, with the certainty of every primitive instinct he possessed, that the source of that sound was not one of the bodies on the floor. He turned. The body he was watching had been lying flat on its back, its distended stomach forming a pale dome in the darkness. And now, that dome was moving, not with the random tremor of settling tissue, not with anything that could be attributed to physics, or gravity, or the ship's slow movement against the breakwater. It moved with direction, with purpose, rippling from within, as though something on the other side of that stretched skin had become aware of the light source in the room and was orienting toward it, repositioning itself for what came next. The skin split along a line that ran several inches below the navel, and through the gap came a leg. It extended slowly, almost carefully, unfolding joint by joint from the wound, with a horrible deliberateness, the limb thick as a man's forearm, covered in dense, coarse hair, the color of old iron, still trailing wet strings of tissue that it dragged across the dead man's torso as it reached outward and found the floor. A second leg followed, then a third, spreading wide to brace the body of the thing as it hauled itself forward through the opening. And then the creature itself pressed through, a mass that seemed too large to have fit inside any human body, segmented, dense, covered in the same dark hair as its legs, its surface glistening faintly with fluid. It moved with the slow patience of something that had never needed to hurry, and as the last of it cleared the wound and the remnants collapsed inward with a soft, concussive exhale, the creature settled its weight onto all 8 legs and went still. Then it opened its eyes. Not 2 eyes, not the bilateral symmetry of anything Elliot's mind could comfortably file under spider or insect or any other category that carried with it the reassurance of scale and familiarity, but clusters of eyes, scattered across the body's upper surface, in arrangements that seemed to have their own internal logic. Each lens, a deep, wet red, that caught the flashlight beam and held it without reflection, drinking the light, rather than returning it. They opened in sequence, one cluster, then another, each set dilating and focusing with the deliberate precision of a camera lens, finding its subject, until every last one of them was fixed on Elliot, with an attention so complete and so cold that he had the sudden, irrational certainty that he was not simply being seen, but being assessed, that whatever process passed for thought inside that body was moving through something that resembled a decision. He hit the cargo hold door with his shoulder, hard enough to feel it in his teeth, and then he was running. The room he stumbled into when he finally stopped, when his legs decided on their own that stopping was now required, turned out to be the ship's surveillance center, a narrow space lined with equipment racks and monitor banks that had all gone dark. He found the backup power supply beneath the main console and spent several minutes working through it methodically, hands only slightly unsteady, until a single terminal flickered to life. The file system was corrupted in places, but functional in others. He navigated it with the focused concentration of someone who needed very badly to be doing something purposeful with his hands. He found the archived camera footage from the cargo hold, from the surrounding areas. He sat down in the chair someone had left pulled out from the console and watched 9 days disappear in front of him. The footage told him what he needed to know. He watched the ceramic vessel, ancient, sealed along its lid with what looked like wax or resin, applied in thick, careful lines, recovered from an excavation site, referenced in the ship's internal manifest, only by a set of coordinates, and the word, restricted. He watched it tip from its housing when a crew member stumbled against a crate, watched it strike the floor and split cleanly in two, watched the substance inside roll out across the cargo hold floor with a speed and directional coherence that no gas or smoke behaved with, heavy, dark, purposeful, seeking the corners, finding the gaps beneath doors, filling the low spaces of the room. Before anyone had time to register what was happening, 3 men had been standing in the hold when it broke. He watched them, over the following footage, grow thin, not gradually, not at the pace of ordinary illness, but visibly, day by day. The footage showed faces going gaunt, limbs losing their mass, movements becoming slow and labored, until on the 3rd day, the first man collapsed in a corridor and began, as he lay on the floor, to exhale the same dark, particulate substance in slow plumes from his open mouth, and the spores drifted outward across the floor, and the ventilation drew them through the ship, and the cycle continued until the police team finally arrived. Elliot sat back from the screen. Elliot sat back from the screen. Spores, not smoke, not a chemical agent, not anything that behaved according to the toxicological frameworks he'd spent 13 years working within. A biological agent that colonized a living host, used the body's own resources as a growth medium, consuming from the inside while the exterior shell continued to function, growing to maturity over the course of days, before the creature finally tore its way out through the abdominal wall and left behind whatever the desiccated remains of the host had become. He thought about the dust, the thick, gray-white layer of it, covering every surface in the cargo hold, settled evenly across the floor, the crates, the dead men, undisturbed, because the hold's doors had been sealed, sealing most of the reproductive material inside, with the bodies that had already served their purpose, trapping a full generation's worth of spores in the one place that, until 3 days ago, had remained closed. He had walked through that dust. He had noted its depth. He had photographed it. He had moved through it for several minutes, while the particles disturbed by his footsteps rose gently around him, and his suit had been sealed, and he was fine, and it was time to leave. He picked up the camera and moved to the door. The corridor stretched empty in both directions. He chose left, because left was the way he had come. He walked quickly, keeping his light on the middle distance rather than the floor, checking each intersection before he committed to crossing it. The ship's sounds moved around him. The slow groan of metal, the low oscillation of water against the hull. He let them be background rather than threat. He passed the barricaded cabin. He passed the corridor with the broken lights, navigating it by memory. He passed the wall with the SOS and kept his eyes forward. He could feel the cold of the morning air ahead of him now, seeping through the hull's gaps in thin streams. 30 meters felt like a distance he could actually cover. He turned the last corner before the main hatch. The creature was standing in the corridor, directly in front of him, filling the space from wall to wall. His 8 legs spread wide, his body held low. Every cluster of those red eyes, already open, already pointed at him. It was not moving. It had no need to move, because it was between him and the only exit. And it appeared to understand this, the way that certain things understand certain things, not through reasoning, but through a patient, comprehensive awareness of the geometry of a situation. He stood 12 feet away, staring into those eyes, trying to reconstruct in his mind the sequence of events that could have resulted in this creature standing here. The cargo hold door had been unlatched when he arrived. He had assumed it had been left open by one of the previous teams. He had not, in the moment, stopped to consider what that implied about the time elapsed between when the previous teams had been inside and the present, or about what might have had ample opportunity to move through the ship unobserved, while the hold sat open and the corridors sat dark. 2 police teams, 7 officers, 4 investigators, 2 technicians, 14 people who had come aboard as professionals, who had done what professionals do: opened doors, examined rooms, followed procedures, and had not come back out. He understood now exactly how thoroughly they had opened things. He ran. The creature came after him. The sound of it moving, the rapid, even percussion of 8 legs against steel plating, all striking in that particular sequence that no land animal Elliot had ever encountered, moved in, pursued him through 3 corridors, and a dead end that cost him 10 seconds he couldn't afford, through a storage room where his flashlight finally died. He navigated the last 8 feet to the far door, entirely by touch, his hands flat against the wall, fingers finding the door frame and then the handle. He ran through a flooded compartment where the water came up to his knees, his boots filled. The drag of it nearly took him down. He hit the far stairs and pulled himself up out of it. He went through a rusted hatch that had seized half shut, had to put both hands against the frame and throw his full weight against it, felt the metal edge catch across his shoulder with a sharp, grinding shriek of protest. And then the deck was under his feet. The gangway was in front of him. The pier was there. The vehicles, the people in tactical gear running toward him with their hands out. The cold harbor air was hitting his face, and it was real, and he was outside. He bent over with his hands on his knees and breathed. They were guiding him toward the debrief vehicle. 2 agents, 1 on each side, close, but not quite touching. The way you guide someone you're not yet sure about. When the cold registered, a specific, localized cold, concentrated along the line of his left shoulder, where the suit's insulation should have been keeping the morning air out completely, a small pocket of external temperature pressing against his skin in a way that meant something was no longer between them. He turned his head and looked. The tear was small enough that he might not have noticed it for hours if the morning hadn't been quite so cold. 3 centimeters, perhaps 4, running along the shoulder seam in a clean line, the edges slightly frayed, which meant it hadn't happened all at once, which meant it had been in progress for some portion of the time he had spent inside, working itself wider with every movement, and he had no way to know how wide it had been when he had still been in the cargo hold, standing in the gray-white dust, breathing sealed air, while particles rose quietly from the floor around his feet. He looked at the tear for a moment, and then he let the agent on his left take his arm and guide him the remaining distance to the vehicle, and he got in and sat down, and the door closed, and he looked out through the window at the harbor. He felt completely normal. He was aware that this meant almost nothing. The footage had shown 3 men going about their routines for the better part of a day after the vessel broke open, eating, working, laughing at something one of them said, entirely unaware of what had already begun inside them, and he understood that the absence of symptoms was not the same thing as the absence of the thing causing them. The vehicle started moving. The pier fell away behind him, and Elliot Cass sat with his hands folded in his lap, breathing evenly, looking at the pale morning light on the water, and said nothing to anyone